The mix console is probably one of my most favorite areas of Studio One, so let's go ahead and take a look at it and see how we can personalize it to set it up as we'd like to see it when we're working on a mix or a track, as well as some of the routing capabilities that it has. Now, as we've seen in previous sections, we can access the mix console by clicking on the mix button here below. We can also press F3 on our QWERTY keyboard. Now currently there's not much going on because we don't have any instruments loaded or any audio tracks, so let's go ahead and fix that. I'll press T on the QWERTY keyboard for the Add Tracks dialog. Now I'm going to bring in some audio tracks, maybe say a count of 4. Mono is fine. I'll click OK. And now we can see we have a bit more going on within the console. And I'm also going to bring an instrument in, so I will press F6 to access the Instruments tab, and I'll drag in an impact just below our audio track in the range view. I'll close out the browser. And so now we have a channel for our impact instrument. It's a stereo channel. So now let's take a look at some of the ways that we can go ahead and personalize the view within the console. First of all, we can detach by clicking on this up arrow here. And you can see now we can drag this even to a second monitor if we like, and click on this button here to expand that and maximize it for a full view within that monitor. If we go ahead and like to redock, we can click the down arrow. And by default, we're going to open into a large view for the console. We can change that by clicking on this button here to toggle between small and large. If I click, we just have this smaller view, at least vertically, where the inserts and sends have now been collapsed into the channels below here. And we would then access those by clicking on this button. And you can see inserts and sends. If I toggle back the large view, we can see that they are up above here. Now we also have a narrow view, and that's going to be available whether we're in the large or the small. Now next here we can access different panels and show and hide those. So we have one for inputs. If I click on that, we can see the hardware inputs for our audio device that we have set up for Studio One. We can show the outputs. Now my interface only has 2 outs, so they are utilizing the master out, and that's why nothing is showing when I click outputs. But if you activated additional outputs on your audio face, those will show up here. We then have external for any external devices that we have set up with Studio One. I have an Impact LX25 connected, so that's what that is. We can hide that. By default, the instruments panel will be showing, and you can just double click to access any of the VST instruments that you currently have open in your song. We can hide that panel though by clicking there. And we have a channel list here. So if you had a lot going on within this song, this is a way to kind of manage and show and hide particular channels like so. We could click, hold, and drag to show and hide channels in a quicker way. I'll click and drag to show those. At the bottom, we can choose to hide our audio tracks. This icon ties in with these here, so that waveform lets us know they're audio tracks. Now here is our impact track, which is an instrument track. We can tell by that keyboard icon. So if we'd like to hide our instrument tracks, we would just click here. I'll go ahead and show those. And next we have effects channels and bus channels, but we haven't added any. If we'd like to, we can right click and then add from here. In the upper left corner, we can click on this down arrow and add a bus channel from there as well, or an effects channel, or even a VCA channel. We can even access our audio I/O from here. I'll cancel out. So now that we have our effects and bus, we can see that these are active, and we can just click to hide those. If we would like to add inserts or sends to our different channels or tracks, we can click on the plus button. I'll click on the personas folder, and let's just put an analog delay on there. We can see that that pops up for adjusting the parameters. I'll close that out, and we can see it's listed here in our inserts. If at any time I'd like to access it from the console, I could just double click and that pops open. And I'm going to add a second effect here, say the chorus. I'll close that out, and we can see that we have these power buttons, so we could power these off individually. We also have this power button for the entire channel. If I click that, then it's going to disable all of the inserts at one time. I'll go ahead and activate those again. The down arrow here is going to allow us to access presets for effects chains that have already been set up within Studio One, or any presets that you've added yourself. If we've got effects on a channel and we're happy with the adjustments that we've made and we'd like to apply them to another channel, we could simply click, hold, and drag, and then those will be placed on that other channel as well. Since we've created an effects channel here, we can come to the sends and click that bus, and we could send that to that effects channel if this had effects here that we'd like to apply. And we can send multiple channels over to the effects for that processing, which would save CPU. If you say had 8 channels of background vocals and you'd like to apply the same reverb to all of those, then you can load that reverb on the effects channel and then just direct those individual channels to it versus putting that reverb on each individual one. We then have a panning control, which we can just click, hold, and drag to adjust. If we control click, then that's going to take that back to its default center position. We could also click on this area here to manually input a value. We next have a readout for the fader level of the channel. We can click there and input a value. And if I adjust the fader, we can see that this adjusts up above. If I control click, just as with the panning, we can take that back to 0 dB. We then have solo and mute controls, and we can press M or S on our QWERTY keyboard to activate those. We have record arm and monitoring. We can use R on the QWERTY keyboard to arm and U to activate monitoring. We then have several LEDs here that are going to give you an indicator as to whether you have inserts active or sends active or mix effects on this channel. Since we have inserts and sends that are active, the top 2 are highlighted. Now we haven't added any mix effects, but if I were to come to mix effects here and then choose the console shaper, I'll close that out and we can see that this has become active here. Now at the bottom we have a button for accessing the channel editor. We then have controls for the automation mode for the channel, which we will cover in a later section, working with automation. And at the bottom we can see our channel and track name. We can actually click once to access a color palette and change its color. And if we double click, we can rename our channel. And that follows along up above on our track. Now moving on to the master channel, we have a button here for activating our click track for this channel, and into the center here we have volume control for that click track, and then to the right we have whether we'd like for the master out to be stereo or mono, and that ties in with this here down within the transport bar. Moving back up to the top left corner, we have global mute and solo controls. So if I were to solo several of these tracks, I can then take that off by clicking on the global solo. And this is the same with mute. If I mute several tracks, I can turn them all off at once by pressing the global mute. If I press the solo or mute in the global controls up here again, then that reactivates the previous setting. Now we have this wrench icon here, and if we click that, we're presented with a menu where we can make different adjustments for the grouping and visibility of our console. Now going into each one is a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, but I would like to mention the colorized channel strips. So if you click that, we can then have our full channel be the color of that we've selected within the color palette. I'll go ahead and deselect that. And we also have show input-output connections, and that is active, but we're not seeing them. Now I'm working on a smaller monitor that has a smaller resolution, but if I pull this up and come here, we can then see we have access to our ins and outs. By clicking once, we can then choose a different output, and we can click on the main, which is where they're all being directed currently, and then choose to send it to the bus or the effects channel that we've created. If I choose the bus, then we can see that we now have one dash, meaning that we have one channel that is active. actively being sent to the bus. If I send another, then we can see we now have a couple of dashes, and the effects, we have one because we have sent this first track here to the effects channel a moment ago. And the last thing I'd like to mention is we've seen that we can hide the channel types by clicking these buttons below. If you would like to hide this channel list panel, you can actually click on these horizontal bars, and then that will go away as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of flexibility for choosing what you'd like to see or what you don't want to see, as well as the routing capabilities and the drag and drop functionality for our inserts. And that has been a look at the console within Studio One 4.